From the floor of the media center, where we're still, I suppose, rubbing shoulders with the big minds that really help us continue connecting the dots insofar as what we need to think about around that declaration and essentially the purpose of this G20 summit. I'm joined now by Dr. Thelela Ngcetane-Vika, I beg your pardon. She's an international law, governance and gender studies scholar. Doc, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for agreeing that we can grab you very quickly and pick your brains on these issues. And I'm hoping you and I can pick up on, what we've heard and certainly what we haven't about gender at a summit like this, because we do know this is such an important issue and such a long-standing problem, but it doesn't seem that it gets enough airtime, at least on these kind of global stages.
Yes, good morning, Ayanda and the viewers. Gender is central in governance, whether that governance happens at a local level, national level, and indeed at a global level. But sometimes it is very muted on the agendas, on global spaces. And one typical example of that, when you're looking at the family photo, what comes to mind? You see all these powerful men in suits, and you probably will see one or two women in that. So gender has to occupy. In fact, the question we ought to be asking, why gender continues to be a by the way in global spaces and indeed in national spaces, but perhaps it talks to the frameworks that we have on gender equality, but more importantly, it talks to our inability to really implement those. So it would be interesting to see how is the posture of the Declaration on Gender Equality as an important aspect if you are to bring the issue of equality, because equality really rallies around all of us and gender becomes critical in that discourse, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, often when we speak about inequality, people always think about economic inequality, and that certainly has its place. But what we've noticed is that the question of gender and issues to do with gender are so top of mind for ordinary people, and that's why we saw that groundswell of support when there was a protest against gender-based violence in the lead-up to a summit like this.
Yes, Friday, in its way, it was beautiful in its pain. I was actually emotional on Friday when I saw women lying on their stomachs, especially those in Pretoria, of course, across the country. And I was even more heartened to see men also really taking the cause, because that cause is a cause for all of us. Until a society has dealt with issues of gender, let alone GBV, because GBV is only an element of the broader complexities of gender. But until all of us in a society we deal with those issues, they will continue to haunt us. They will continue to haunt the next generation and indeed the next after the next. So gender has to be central to agendas. In fact, there is no governance without gender. What are you governing? Why are you leaving others outside the table when you say everyone in the table? So issues of equality cannot be addressed without talking about gender equality. And gender equality needs to be nuanced in the public discourse. What do we even mean? Do we talk about representation, or do we talk about symbolism? Do we talk about tokenism, or do we talk about effective representation, so that when you see a Thelela occupying a position, you know that she can hold power. She's not holding power on behalf of somebody who's not seen.
Yeah, it's one thing to have a seat on the table, it's another to give that person a voice. Speaking about that nuance, I'm sure you'll know as a scholar that literature is divided about who's actually meant to take the charge. Can we trust a group of men ultimately to shift the dial? Or, does the data suggest that, quite frankly, they're never going to do enough because of how they're also implicated and their own intersectional kind of positioning?
We can hold two things at the same time. Women, and really, when we talk gender, by the way, it's much more broader than men and women, so we can talk about that later. But women, of course, have got a responsibility. They're feeling the pain of gender inequality. However, men have got responsibilities. They're born from mothers. They're married to wives. They've got daughters. So it becomes a responsibility for all of us. I always tell this story. I really benefited from my father who allowed me to sit in tables at home with my all elder brothers who were taller than me, and I was the youngest daughter. And that voice has taken me to global bodies because my father believed in me and was the moral lesson of the story. When men do their part in the gender story, society benefits. It's all on us. What did Mandela say to us? It's now in your hands. Men, show up. South African men, show up. African men, show up with us. Let's march towards the next line of freedom. And I'm calling all of you.
Absolutely, loud and clear. Speaking of Mandela, yesterday President Cyril Ramaphosa evoked the memory of this icon, saying South Africa has now taken its place in the community of nations. Allow me to segue into speaking about trade and international trade, because I know that's another area of your speciality. Help us kind of place where we're at, because I know there's been a big emphasis on rules-based trading and the importance of multilateralism. And you really get the sense, at least, that the countries that are here are singing from one hymn sheet insofar as that is concerned, in the absence of you-know-who from you-know-where.
Yes. I mean, when you're looking first and foremost, the multilateral order, the global order, that very global architecture, economic architecture, has got the nuances of the power dynamics, the global north, the global south, the oscillation of those powers. And the blocks like the BRICS will help us perhaps from the global south to really leverage our own power. But if we're looking at the declarations, what is it for Africans in terms of the trade? If we're to use the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to leverage, for instance, one of the priorities, debt relief, critical mineral resources, amongst others, and also the challenges of energy as an aspect of security in the continent. There's so much for us in that declaration, but perhaps the question, the critical nexus question we need to ask, our leaders have got the will and the commitment to take forward, because G20 is coming and almost gone. But can African leaders really move forward with what's there? Beneficiation, under investment. Right? If you
Can I throw that question to you? Can they? I mean, you know, the African Continental Free Trade Area was ratified a while ago, and few people can point to what we've kind of gotten so far.
It talks to the problems of the continent, and I'm sad when I have to talk about them, the fragmentation. You see the dynamics with the ECOWAS. You see also the problems. I mean, if you're looking, for instance, at Ethiopia, you would think that Ethiopia with 5% economic growth, it wouldn't be dealing with issues of poverty, but it does. What does that tell you? The framework, the finance framework, the lending, and all the financial institutions are really working against the tide of Africans. This is why our leaders, through bodies like the AU, they must push the envelope. There's no time now, no time for complicity. You're seeing also really the resurgence of voices from the youth, from the continent, whether is it in Kenya, whether is it in Nigeria or South Africa, across the continent. The time is now. They better do what is expected. Otherwise, the 2063 agenda would not only really be a colossal failure, it would be an indictment on them. But I also say to all of us, we must do our part, hence we're here.
Yeah, that question is an important one, right? What does doing my part as an ordinary person look like? My concern has always been that these discussions sometimes feels very high level. I mean, being here, I've never seen Nasrec look any better than this. And we're just a stone throw away in the south of Johannesburg from one of the biggest townships in the country. And yeah, you know, I do wonder if people in Soweto watching us not too far from where they live, whether they feel part of all of this and how they can feel a whole lot more involved.
It's sad, Ayanda, you're so right. As I was driving here in the morning, I was actually seeing the disconnect between this event with its gravitas and all the critical decisions that have been made, but also looking at fellow South Africans, Sowetans, walking, looking for transport. Sometimes they don't even know what's happening in these halls. It becomes the responsibility of our governments to educate our people, but more critically, it becomes their responsibility to make sure bodies bodies like the G20 and decisions taken and the declarations that are made, they become lived experiences. I mean, South Africans have been making a joke on Twitter that keep the streets clean. You've kept them clean for G20. You better do so for us. That tells you the disconnect, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It speaks also to the level of trauma. Dr. Thelela, it's lovely catching up. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. Dr. Thelela Ngcetane-Vika, an international law, governance and gender studies scholar. And, you know, there's a few people here who, of course, have spent a considerable amount of time thinking deeply about these issues and what they mean for ordinary South Africans. And hopefully we'll continue getting an opportunity to ventilate some of their thoughts as we continue bringing you this historic summit, the G20 2025, live to you from the south of Johannesburg in Nasrec. More of our rolling coverage in just a moment. Do stay with us.
SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.